Welcome to the Stewards Enquiry on the Winners' Enclosure. Pleased to be joined by Chris Dixon to reflect back on what was a brilliant weekend of racing. It was a bit of a washout on the Friday, but things picked up for the Saturday.
Certainly did. Must admit, Emma, the highlight for me was on Friday, that horse that I can't own, winning the final race on the card, Ross Collin, and I was enjoying the rain as it was falling, because he certainly goes through soft ground, and he did so to win that closing handicap. So I was sort of at Epsom in the rain and loving it, but no doubt for most people that the highlight was certainly Snowfall, who was the widest margin Oaks winner in history, and so impressive in doing so.
She was incredible, wasn't she? Because she's really upped her game this year. She was an impressive winner of the Musadora, where plenty of people felt, maybe she got the run of things that day. But I just think she's got an awful lot better as she's gone up in distance.
Yeah, and amazing again, isn't it? You look at these Aidan O'Brien horses. Each year, there's the odd one that's sort of a star from the outset, but then there's an awful lot of them that. She was fairly exposed as a 2-year-old on the face of it. Obviously, she wasn't, but she'd just got the one winner to her name. She'd fallen short in group company, and she was just looking like another well-bred horse that had plenty of ability, but was going to be no star. And then she comes out as a 3-year-old Upton trip. She was impressive, as you say, in the Musadora at York, but she kind of had advantages on the day that made you question to some degree, or made me question, and plenty of others, I think, as to whether she could go and win an Oaks. But she did it in such devastating fashion. Now, I think there were plenty of horses in behind that didn't handle conditions, didn't give their running. But that doesn't really take away from her performance, because she won it by such a wide margin. It's not as if she beat horses that didn't give the running and beat them a few lengths. She absolutely destroyed the field. And just the way that she went through the race was extremely impressive. And she's obviously an absolute top-class filly. And she goes on seemingly all sorts of ground. She stayed the trip very well. I think that was the big reason for her step forward again, was that increased distance. And she's now favourite for the Arc. And you can understand why, really, because fillies and 3-year-old fillies get all those allowances and have a very good record in the Arc in recent times. The recent Arc winners littered with winning fillies and mares, and among them the 3-year-olds, obviously.
And as you say, she's almost popped up out of nowhere. Form last year, nothing to write home about, and then she looks sort of second, third string in the Musadora, and it was like, slightly why is she running here, and bolts up there, and then 16 lengths, she absolutely blew them away. You just don't see that happen in a classic, do you? I mean, she was phenomenal, and it was a pretty nice spare ride for Frankie Dettori.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there was the moment, wasn't there, early on in the straight, as they started to edge towards that stands rail, once the ground was confirmed as really soft. That's often what happens. So after the coronation, they started doing that. And there was that moment where you had Mystery Angel in front. She'd sort of been well positioned and started to kick, and giving her team of owners, Nick Bradley Racing, lots of shareholders in that, a tremendous thrill, even in second spot. But just in behind you could see the O'Brien 2 stacking up. My first thought was, look at Santa Barbara. And then you suddenly think, wait a minute, look at Snowfall. Yeah. Santa Barbara probably didn't quite get home, I felt. And
I
maybe
totally
the ground
agree.
wasn't right.
Yeah, I had my doubts going into it. I very much feel that she's going to be a 10 furlong filly. That's kind of what she's bred to be. But going back to sort of January, February this year, she has been very much the Ballydoyle hype filly, hasn't she? Mm-hmm. She was a favourite for the Guineas, and people thought then, well, that was a good effort over a mile, the trip too short, seemingly. And then she's gone a favourite again for the Oaks. And as you say, I just think she hasn't stayed, and I think she's going to be very effective over 10.
Yeah, I think we're going to see her make her mark at the highest level. She's been beaten in 2 classics, but it's not as if she's looked in those races like she doesn't have top-class ability in there. So I think they'll get it from her at some point. But for the time being, Snowfall has sent herself to the top of that Ballydoyle fillies pecking order, at least on the racecourse, with 2 devastating performances this season. And it'll be great to see her out again. And I think ground-wise, she can do it on anything, really. So that means that she should be easy enough to plot the campaign.
I was delighted to see George Boughey's filly, you've touched on her, Mystery Angel, finishing second. George is having a very, very good time of it, isn't he?
Tremendous time of it. Obviously, he's got his 2-year-olds very well forward and in tremendous form. But this filly is showing that his horses will train on from 2 to 3, and that a filly that he had in top form at Newmarket when she won that listed race early on in the season wasn't just there fitter than the other horses in the early part of the year, but she's maintaining that form as we get into the summer months now. So he's a very, very talented trainer and a name that we're going to hear an awful lot about. He's getting a lot of backing, isn't he? Nick Bradley and his syndicate's having a lot of horses there, but he's got the Ammo Racing spending power behind him as well. So he's a trainer that we're going to hear an awful lot more about.
Yeah, and a really nice guy as well. So what about the Coronation Cup? Because this was a thrilling finish. It looked like the favourite Al Arsi was going to win, I think, a furlong out. But Pile Driver is incredibly tough, wasn't it? Because not only was he slightly hemmed in on the rail, gosh, he battled.
He did, which is something that I didn't really associate with Pile Driver, to be honest. He's a horse that has always looked a bit tricky and awkward. He can be a bit keen, he hangs. Thought he did do it at Newmarket on his return. He was wandering around all over the place. I wonder whether this track sort of helped him in a way, in that he had Al Arsi on the one hand leaning into him because he probably wasn't handling the camber that well, and a rail on the other side, and it just seemed to galvanise him, and he really did knuckle down and scrap. And his attitude, having looked a little bit of a question mark against him previously, suddenly looked a massive positive as he really did knuckle down and scrap. I thought he got a really good ride from Martin Dwyer. And I wonder whether the more prominent tactics suited him. I was reading in the post-race quotes that their plan had been to go on and make the running. But obviously, when something else went on, Highland Chief went on and made the running, Dwyer didn't want to get caught in a pace duel, so he took the lead. And as a result of that, and I think they had a different bit on him as well, he just seemed to relax into his race better, and that probably also helped him at the business end of his races. He's obviously been a good horse for a good while now. I saw that in flashes last season, but this was definitely the peak performance of his career so far in a Group 1 victory, where, as you say, he really battled hard for it.
And as you say, he got a great ride from Martin Dwyer, and Martin's done pretty well. The Group 1s at Epsom, now a Derby and Oaks and the Coronation Cup. But he works hard, and it's good to see, isn't it? Nice results.
Yeah, it is, and he was saying afterwards, he's obviously a bit of a joker, Martin Dwyer. He was saying that there was a time when he was young that he was getting jocked off horses because people wanted experience, and now he's experienced. People will jock him off because they want a young rider that's up and coming. So, either way, you can't win at times, but he was delighted to obviously keep this association going. He's, William Orr isn't going to be getting rid of him in a hurry given the family connection. So they've kept the faith with him on Pile Driver, and knowing a horse does count for plenty, doesn't it? And it's not as if he hasn't got that big race experience. As for Al Arsi, I think he's a horse that we're going to hear plenty more about. I think he showed that he's up to Group 1 class here. I don't think he fully handled the track. I think he was drifting down the camber a little bit. He's yet to win beyond Group 3 company. He's a 3-time Group 3 winner, but I think we're going to see him at the highest level. I wonder whether in between now they might send him to something like the Princess of Wales is at the July meeting, Group 2, 1.5 miles. He won at that meeting last year. Would be the logical stepping stone.
William often targets that race with he's always got something quite hot in it. So it would be an interesting race to almost step off the gas and then maybe step up to a King George in time or something. But no, he certainly looks a real class act. And of course, they were 7 lengths clear of Japan, so the first 2 drew a long way clear.
They did, and the time was a little bit quicker than the Oaks, I think. Now, obviously, they went the shortest way round. They went and stayed on the far side, didn't they? Whereas in the Oaks, they lost that little bit of ground coming towards the stand side, and the tempo was different in the 2 races. But I don't think you'd be questioning the form particularly.
Okay, what about the Derby itself that took place, of course, on Saturday in beautiful sunshine? And Charlie Appleby, what a result for him. He's so down to earth. I saw him yesterday show jumping, and he had about 5 ponies. He's the groom. He's brought straight back down to earth. But a 1-3 and 6 for him in the Derby. And Adayar was sensational for Adam Kirby. We were just talking before we started this. There's a good story to that for him.
Yeah, of course there is. You know, he lost the ride on John Leaper, which he'd taken, and then had to turn down the ride on Adayar because he'd given his word to the connections of John Leaper. He was taken off him in favour of Frank Dettori, who became available once Aidan O'Brien decided that he was only running the one. So an awful lot of things came together to give Kirby a much-deserved victory in the Derby. And it was great to see how much it meant to him. Obviously, it's a second Derby in the space of a few years now, following on from Massar for the Godolphin team, who had a great weekend, for Charlie Appleby as well. And we were talking in the weekend preview, weren't we? Or I was, about that stat from stall 1, and he overcame that as well. And that's now the blueprint of how to ride Epsom from stall 1, I suppose. I thought he got him in the perfect position. But he had to be brave, didn't he? Nipping up that rail when Gear Up gave him the slightest opportunity. There was half a gap, and Kirby had to poke his horse's nose into that gap to fully open it up, and he quickly extended away.
Yeah, he's certainly improved to win that because, of course, he was second in the Sandown Classic trial, and then he was second behind third round, fair and square, beaten at Lingfield. So he's really stepped forward, hasn't he, by quite some way in the Derby.
He has. I think he's a horse that is coming to his peak. I noted, it was Martin that noted down at Sandown when he was working there, how well he shaped, and that in the prelims he was carrying a little bit of condition at that early stage of the season. So I think he's a horse that has progressed in terms of fitness and conditioning through this season, and we're starting to see the real Adayar now. I think we're also seeing a horse that wants a test of stamina. And as we go through the season, for all that he's obviously top class at 1.5 miles, you'd have to think that the St. Ledger is going to be on his agenda because he's bred to stay and he looks to stay. So that's the interesting thing actually about the Derby results. Sometimes you get a few in there that towards the 4 that you think will they stay the St. Ledger trip. So you've got the winner who will, his stablemate in third, Hurricane Lane will stay, and 1 or 2 others look like strong stayers as well. So it could make for a really good Ledger later on in the year.
Okay, let's talk about 1 or 2 in behind. A massive run from Mojo Star at 50-1 to run his heart out to finish second. McSweeney ran well, the Irish Guineas winner, finishing 4th. And then let's talk about Bolshoi Ballet, who went off favourite. Obviously, he's come out of the race a little bit sore. I personally think we're going to see him at his very best at 10 furlongs.
Yeah, I think that could well end up being the case, perhaps, Emma. That video was released on social media, wasn't it, of the nick that he'd taken to his leg, to a hind leg, Bolshoi Ballet, which I don't know the extent to which that would have inconvenienced him. Apparently, it happened early on in the race, and one thing you'd say is it can't be ideal. It won't have been a help. But for whatever reason, he didn't run his race, did he? And I think lack of stamina could well have been part of the problem for him. Hurricane Lane, who finished in 3rd, stamina wasn't a problem for him. I think the track caught him out a little bit. I was a bit worried about that.
He lost both front shoes, didn't he? Hurricane Lane. Yeah.
Right. So,
which again is not ideal, you know.
No, it's not ideal. It doesn't always stop them, but it's certainly not a help, is it?
Yeah.
If it was, you wouldn't start with them. So, you know, that's another, I wasn't aware of that. That's another factor to throw into him. I think the track was as much of a problem as anything. I thought that at York when he won the Dante. I just wasn't sure he looked like the type of horse that would take to Epsom. And I think a flatter, more galloping track will suit him. So I think we could see him at the top level. But as back to Bolshoi Ballet, I sort of agree that trip might have been part of the problem.
Okay. And anything else? What about John Leaper? A word on him. Who Frankie rode. He's obviously slightly quirky, this horse. He's definitely talented, but he was taken to start very, very slowly, wasn't he, on his own? And he fell in a heat, but he was sent a long way from home.
Round the wide outside as well. And the way that he made that move was eye-catching, wasn't it? There was sort of a flash of brilliance in the performance from John Leaper that suggests to me he's a horse to not give up on at the top level, but down in trip. I think he's going to be too strong for his races, too keen for his races for a mile and a half, particularly at a track like Epsom where you're uphill early on, and it's probably not quite tractable enough for it. A well-run 10 furlongs, he might just switch off a little bit better. He might be an easier ride in that sort of race. And I can certainly see further into the year, over 10 furlongs, being a horse that has an impact at the top level. Having said that, the French Derby winner, St Mark's Basilica, isn't going to be an easy horse to knock around at that sort of trip in this sort of company.
So what about the Derby as a whole? Would you weigh it up and conclude it by saying you feel it was a strong race?
I think it was probably better than we've had for a couple of years. I think probably about the best Derby winner since Massar won it a few years back. The Derby hasn't actually proved a really strong piece of form in recent times, has it? It's been a little bit disappointing in terms of future winners for the winners of the race. So I'm hoping that this year proves a little bit stronger, and I don't see it being a year where we don't get any future winners out there. Obviously, we had a maiden finishing in second spot, but he's a horse that had some good form going into it and a good pedigree. And incidentally, Manobo, the horse that beat him at Newbury in that maiden, he's owned by Godolphin, so they've got another good one to look forward to.
Chris, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your reflections and thoughts on what was a wonderful weekend at Epsom. The show rolls on. Of course, we've got some beautiful weather forecast the next couple of weeks, some good racing as well, and we'll be looking ahead on Thursday. Have a good few days.
And you, Emma. Cheers.